It had been years since I first realized the truth, but I had never allowed myself to face it. David and I had been married for over a decade, and our lives seemed perfect on the surface. We had a house in the suburbs, 2 children who were well-behaved, and a seemingly perfect relationship that everyone envied. Friends always commented on how lucky we were, how we seemed to understand each other so effortlessly. They couldn't have been more wrong. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was during the first year of our marriage, when I began to feel the suffocating weight of pretending. Or maybe it was after our first child was born, when the realization hit me with more clarity than ever before: I had never truly been attracted to David. I didn't feel the spark that people talked about when they found their soulmate. It was more like, well, like I was filling a role. A wife. A mother. A dutiful partner. I thought I could make myself feel something for him, that in time, it would come naturally. But it didn't. The attraction was never there. Not once. For years, I went through the motions. I smiled at him when he came home from work. I kissed him goodnight, pretending that I wanted to be close. I faked affection during our intimate moments, telling myself that it was just a phase. But the truth was, I was lying. To him. To myself. And worst of all, to our children. I told myself that the family we had built was enough to justify the sacrifices I had made. That the good times would somehow make up for the empty ones. But deep down, I knew I was fooling no one but myself. I often wondered if David ever suspected anything. Maybe he had, but chose to ignore it. He always seemed so content, so oblivious to my emotional distance. He loved me with an intensity that I could never reciprocate. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way he tried so hard to make me happy. His effort was constant, and I couldn't bring myself to be honest with him. Not because I didn't care, well, maybe a little, but because I was terrified of what it would mean for our family, for our life together. That fear had kept me quiet for years. Until now. It had been a typical Saturday night. The kids were in bed, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. David was sitting on the couch, reading through some old magazines, the same routine as every weekend. I could feel the weight of the secret pressing on me. It was becoming unbearable, the guilt, the dishonesty. I couldn't keep pretending any longer. Not when the truth had become so obvious, so loud in my head that I couldn't escape it. I had decided. That night, I would tell him everything. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, my hands trembling. I knew what I was about to do would change everything. But there was no going back. It was too late to hold it in anymore. As I walked back into the living room, I felt the room shrink around me. The walls seemed to close in, as if they were witnesses to the breaking of something so fragile. David looked up from his magazine and smiled. That warm, affectionate smile that always made me feel guilty for what I was about to say. I tried to force a smile in return, but it felt like I was wearing a mask. "Hey," I said, my voice betraying me with a tremor. "Can we talk?" His smile faded slightly, concern replacing it. He sat up straighter, setting the magazine aside. "Of course. What's wrong?" I couldn't find the words right away. My mind was a blur of thoughts, of the years I had spent pretending, of the lies I had told myself. How could I even begin to explain something so deep, so complicated? How could I make him understand that my feelings had never been real? "I've been thinking," I began slowly, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about us, about everything. And I need to tell you something. Something important." David's expression softened. "What is it, Emily? You're scaring me a little." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I haven't been honest with you, David. Not for a long time. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? What are you talking about? The words that had been trapped inside me for so long came rushing out in a flood. I've been pretending. For years. Pretending to be attracted to you, pretending to feel the things I should feel. But I never did. I never loved you the way I should have. And I've been living a lie. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as his face changed, the color draining from it. His eyes, usually so full of warmth, turned cold and distant. It was as if everything I had just said hit him like a slap across the face. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me in disbelief. I don't understand, he finally whispered, his voice cracking. All these years, and you've been pretending? His words were filled with pain, and I felt my chest tighten with regret. But it was too late to take it back now. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop lying. I thought I could make myself feel it, but I never could. And I couldn't keep pretending anymore. David stood up suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor. You've been lying to me. All this time. All these years. His voice was shaking now, anger and hurt mixing together in a way I had never seen before. I never wanted to hurt you, David. I really didn't, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I told you the truth. Scared of losing everything. He took a step back, his hand rubbing his face in disbelief. What does this mean for us? For our family? His eyes were wide with confusion, and I could see the weight of my words settling on him like a heavy burden. I don't know, I admitted, feeling the enormity of what I had done. But I had to tell you. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. David's face twisted with emotion, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But instead, he just turned and walked toward the door. I need some time, Emily. I don't know what to think right now. I don't know if I can even look at you right now. And with that, he was gone, leaving me standing there, alone, with the crushing weight of the truth. The house felt different the next morning. It was as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I woke up to the familiar sound of birds chirping outside our window, the soft hum of life continuing as usual. But inside, everything had changed. The silence between David and me hung like a thick fog that refused to lift. I had spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. What had I done? The words I had spoken to David were irreversible, and now I had to face the consequences. I had shattered the foundation of everything we had built together, and I had no idea how to fix it, or if I even could. I heard the shower running in the bathroom, and for a brief moment, I thought about going in there to speak with him, to apologize, to try to explain. But what could I say? How could I make him understand something so deeply ingrained in me? How could I undo the damage that I had caused with just a few sentences? The truth was that I couldn't. The damage was done. David had left in the middle of the night, his absence hanging in the air like a wound that hadn't begun to heal. I had sent him a text around midnight, asking if we could talk, but there had been no response. And now, as the hours ticked by, I was left to wonder whether he would even come home. Would he come back to face me, or had I driven him away for good? The kids woke up as usual, oblivious to the storm that had shaken our world the night before. They ran down the stairs with sleepy eyes, laughing and calling for breakfast, their innocence a sharp contrast to the turmoil I was feeling inside. I forced myself to smile and go through the motions of preparing their meals, making sure to keep up the appearance of normalcy. But it was hard. It felt wrong to be pretending, even for them. After they had eaten, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coffee cup in front of me. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't touched anything. I didn't know what to do, how to move forward. The weight of my confession sat on my chest, a constant reminder of the mess I had created. I couldn't escape it. Then, finally, I heard the front door open. My heart stopped for a moment as I heard David's footsteps in the hallway. He was home, but there was no warmth in his footsteps, no comfort in the sound of him walking through the door. It was as though we were strangers, and the life we had shared was slipping through my fingers. I took a deep breath and stood up, my hands trembling. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment where I would face the full brunt of the consequences of my actions. David walked into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot and tired, as though he hadn't slept at all. His face was a mask, hiding whatever emotions were bubbling beneath the surface. He didn't look at me, not directly. Instead, he glanced at the floor, at the walls, as if avoiding my gaze would somehow make this easier. It didn't. Good morning, I said quietly, my voice cracking despite my best effort to sound normal. David didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring at the counter, his jaw clenched. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and barely audible. I don't know what you want me to say, Emily. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. I don't expect you to know what to say. I don't expect you to forgive me either. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. I had to tell you. David's hands tightened into fists at his sides, his knuckles going white. A lie? All this time, you've been lying to me. And you think telling me this now is supposed to make it better? I never wanted to hurt you, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I thought I could fix it, that I could make myself feel something, but I couldn't. I've been pretending. And I couldn't do it anymore. He was silent for a long time, his eyes never meeting mine. The room was heavy with the weight of unspoken words, of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. I wanted him to scream at me, to yell and demand answers. But he didn't. He just stood there, his silence more painful than any words could have been. I don't know what to do with this, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to move past this. How do we even begin to fix something like this? I shook my head, feeling the tears threatening to spill over. I don't know, David. I don't know if we can fix it. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. David looked at me then, his gaze hard and cold. You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed us. How am I supposed to even look at you the same way again? How am I supposed to trust you after this? His words stung, more than I could have ever imagined. And yet, they were the truth. I had destroyed everything. My lies, my secrets, had shattered the very foundation of our marriage. And now there was nothing left but the wreckage. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling hollow as they left my lips. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. David's expression softened for a moment, but then it hardened again, and he turned away, walking out of the kitchen without another word. I watched him go, my heart aching as I realized that this might be the last time we would ever have a conversation like this. As I stood there, the silence between us growing longer, I knew that our marriage had been irreparably changed. There was no going back from this, no undoing what had been done. I had confessed, I had told him the truth, but I wasn't sure it would be enough. Was it possible to rebuild after such a betrayal? Or had I doomed us both to a future of regret and heartbreak? The answers, I realized, were not something I could give him. They were something we both had to figure out, alone. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, moving through the motions like a ghost. David didn't come back to the kitchen after his brief departure, and I didn't go searching for him. I couldn't. Not yet. The weight of everything hung between us like a heavy curtain, too thick to penetrate. He was still here physically, but I felt miles away from him, like a stranger in the same house. The kids were out in the backyard, playing, completely unaware of the wreckage that had just unfolded. Their laughter echoed through the house, cutting through the silence in a way that almost felt cruel. I wanted to be able to smile, to join in their joy, but my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't in anything. I found myself drifting from room to room, searching for something, anything, to fill the void inside me. I eventually found myself standing in front of the mirror in our bedroom. The same mirror I had looked into 1,000 times before, brushing my hair, checking my makeup, adjusting my clothes. But today, I saw nothing but a stranger staring back at me. The reflection of the woman who had just confessed the most painful truth to her husband. The woman who had broken everything. I didn't recognize her. I had spent so many years pretending, so many years convincing myself that everything was fine when it wasn't. How had I let it get this far? How had I let the lie grow so big, so deep, that it consumed everything around me? The sound of the front door opening startled me out of my thoughts. I froze. It was David, back again. I didn't know how long he'd been gone, but the moment he stepped inside, I felt it. His presence, once comforting, now felt like a burden. He didn't say anything as he walked into the living room. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my existence in the slightest. He just passed by, heading toward the stairs. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He didn't need to hear my apologies again. What good would they do now? He was already beyond that point. I followed him, my footsteps soft and hesitant as I made my way to the base of the stairs. He was halfway up when I called his name, the sound of it barely a whisper in the silence of the house. David. He stopped, but didn't turn around. His shoulders tensed, and I could feel the wall he was building between us, brick by brick. It was suffocating. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Please. He stood there for a moment, unmoving, before he spoke. What's there left to say, Emily? What else could you possibly have to say to me after everything? His words stung more than I expected, and I flinched. But I couldn't back down now. I had to try. I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I've hurt you in a way that's unforgivable. But I need you to know that I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could pretend long enough for it to not matter, but it always did. David finally turned to face me, his eyes empty, void of the warmth they once held. It was as if the man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who didn't know how to look at me the same way anymore. I don't know how to look at you right now, he said, his voice cold. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who I am either. My heart cracked at his words, but I couldn't run from this. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. Not when it clearly wasn't. I've spent so much of our marriage lying to you, lying to myself, I said, my voice trembling. I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved, David. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. And now everything is falling apart because of that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until he spoke again, his words cutting through the air. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Emily. And I don't know if I even want to try. You've broken something in me that I don't think can be fixed. I felt the weight of his words, each one sinking into me like a stone. There was no escaping it. There was no easy fix. I had torn everything down, and now I had to live with the consequences. I don't know what to do, David, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't know how to make this right. He didn't answer right away, and when he did, it was with a quiet, almost bitter laugh. Making it right? You think there's a way to fix this? You think there's a way to just go back? I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? How could I even begin to explain the mess I had created, the years of pretending that had finally come to light? I don't know, I said, my voice breaking. But I want to try. I want to do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't want to lose you. David's expression softened just slightly, but it didn't last. You already have, he said softly, almost to himself. Then, without another word, he turned and continued up the stairs. I stood there for a long time, rooted to the spot, my mind racing with a million thoughts. What had I expected? What did I think would happen? That he would suddenly forgive me? That everything would just go back to the way it was before? No. It was never going to be that simple. I had hurt him in a way that couldn't be undone, and now we were both left to deal with the fallout. I wasn't sure if there was a way forward, but I knew one thing for sure, I had to face this, no matter how hard it was. No matter how much it tore me apart. I took a deep breath and wiped the tears from my eyes, steeling myself for what was to come. The road ahead was uncertain, and I didn't know if we would ever find our way back to each other. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. The days after that conversation felt like weeks. David and I existed in the same space, but we didn't speak much. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, just an aching silence that filled every corner of the house. I tried to go about my days, pretending that everything was normal, but nothing felt normal. The weight of my confession hung over me like a dark cloud, and every time I looked at David, I could see the hurt in his eyes, the distance between us growing wider with each passing moment. I kept asking myself if this was really it, if the damage I had done was irreparable. I wanted so badly to believe that we could fix it, that with time, we could heal. But a part of me wondered if I had already broken something that could never be repaired. It wasn't until that Saturday morning that I realized how far gone things really were. The kids were outside, playing as usual, and I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee pot as I waited for it to brew. The house felt too quiet. Too still. David was upstairs, as he had been most of the week, retreating into himself. He hadn't mentioned the conversation we'd had after the confession, hadn't said a word about anything. It was like it never happened, and yet everything had changed. I heard the soft creak of footsteps on the stairs, and my heart jumped. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat when I saw him standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His face was unreadable, but there was something different about him. Something that told me this moment, whatever it was going to be important. David, I said softly, trying to gauge his mood. Are you okay? He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me, his eyes searching my face, as though he was looking for something. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Emily. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart skipped a beat, and my chest tightened. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it wouldn't go away. What do you mean? He stepped further into the kitchen, his gaze never leaving mine. I don't know if I can keep living in a house with a stranger. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. When it hasn't been for so long. My mind raced. Was this it? Was he telling me that he was done? That he was finally going to leave? I'm sorry, I said, the words falling from my mouth before I could stop them. I know I've messed everything up. I never meant to hurt you, David. I swear I didn't. David shook his head, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. I know, Emily. I know you didn't mean to. But it doesn't change the fact that you did. It doesn't change the fact that you've spent all these years pretending to love me. And I don't know how to come back from that. The silence between us felt suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything, to make him understand. But the truth was, I couldn't fix this. I couldn't undo the years of lies, the years of pretending. I had broken something inside him, and no amount of apologies or promises could repair it. You have to understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. I never meant to lie to you. I never meant to pretend. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. David's expression softened, but only slightly. He took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words, but in the end, he just let out a quiet sigh. I wish I could believe that, Emily. I wish I could believe that you didn't mean to hurt me. But the truth is, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. The man I had spent my life with, the man I had once loved so deeply, was telling me that he could never love me again. That everything we had built together, everything we had shared, had been nothing but a lie. I understand, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. I know I've ruined everything. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. David stood there for a moment longer, his gaze still fixed on me. Then, slowly, he turned away, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor as he walked back toward the stairs. My heart broke all over again. But then, before he reached the top, he paused. He didn't look back at me, but I could hear the weight of his next words. I need time, Emily. I need time to figure out if this is something I can move past. But right now, I don't know if I can. And with that, he disappeared upstairs. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of what had just happened settled over me. This wasn't just a moment of anger or hurt. This was the beginning of the end. The beginning of a life without him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to plead with him to stay, to tell me that we could fix this, that we could go back to the way things were. But I knew that wasn't possible. I had broken something in him that could never be repaired. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alone. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. The laughter of my children outside seemed like a distant echo, too far removed from the pain I was feeling inside. I sat down at the kitchen table, burying my face in my hands. What had I done? What had I destroyed? The love I had once shared with David was gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. And as I sat there, drowning in my own sorrow, I realized that this was it. This was the end of the road. The life we had built together was over, and there was no going back. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I would never forget the moment I had confessed. The moment I had torn apart the life I had once known. And in the end, I wasn't sure if I would ever find my way back to who I was before.